specific example, the storm worm. Please give him a warm welcome.
Okay, thanks a lot for the nice introduction. As already pointed out, my name is Thorsten Holz. I'm a PhD student from the University of Mannheim, and today I'll talk about Stormworm, one of the most advanced malware binaries currently spreading in the wild. And probably you've read in the media already some numbers of how many thousand IPs are infected. And today I'll try to give an overview of how large the threat is, how many victims we've actually seen in the wild, and then I'll also talk a bit about the actual background of this, which basically shows how advanced modern cybercrime really is. This is joint work with Moritz Steiner, who is another PhD student at the University of Mannheim, and Frederik Dahl, whom I supervise as part of his diploma thesis. And in his diploma thesis, he's working also on peer-to-peer-based botnets. Okay, to the outline of my talk. In the beginning, I'll briefly talk about the history and also the system-level aspects. Since I'm more working in the area of network-level things, I'll focus during the talk more on this network-level stuff, how the bot communicates with each other, how they use a peer-to-peer protocol, what the challenges are on how to track it, and then in the remainder of the talk, I'll provide an overview of the measurement results, giving some real-world numbers of what we've seen in the area of Stormworm. And I'll conclude just with a brief overview of the future. So what can you expect for 2008 and 2009? Stormworm is probably one of the most hyped malware binaries out there. There were a lot of media articles about it. Every major press had an article. It was also mentioned in TV shows, in the news and everything. So for example, the Washington Post, I think they had up to now about 10 articles. Wired had one, Fox News, CNET, Heise had numerous articles. I think the last one was actually yesterday. So it's quite a lot in the media, quite a lot of wrong numbers are given there. Some people talking about 10 million of compromised machines, which is definitely not true. It also doesn't have the power of a supercomputer, so I'll try to give some more real-world numbers today. The worm, or the malware binary, is actually named after Kyrill, which was one of the biggest thunderstorms last year in February. And the name actually refers to one of the topics of a spam mail, which 230 deaths as storm batters Europe. So basically, the media just took this subject of a propagation mail sent by storm, and so this is the name used in the media. While the antivirus company typically use other names, PCOM, NuWar, Celatin, those are all different names for just the same binary. So the common problem is, like with other malware binaries, each AV company basically has its own name, so it's pretty hard to track who is talking about what there. The first sample I found was dated December 29, 2006, so about 1 year ago, where the spam mails basically talked about a Happy New Year, so it was just some kind of greeting card. And then, as an attachment to this mail, there was a malware binary where the people just had to click on the binary and then they are infected. And this is one of the specifics of Storm. Basically, it does not propagate via scanning, so it does not try to exploit vulnerable systems, vulnerable network services, but it just uses social engineering. So it just sends out spam mails, and the people have to click on a link, open the attachment, or do other things. So basically, it's just social engineering, and this seems to be enough to compromise thousands of machines, even in 2007, where most people should be at least educated to not click on everything that they receive in the inbox. The people behind Storm are pretty active, so I think there's no real information who is behind this, but I guess that they have a larger team by now because they are constantly evolving. So in total, I've seen now more than 19 different social engineering campaigns run by them. So they change frequently. For example, if there's some event of public interest, for example, Independence Day, Labor Day, now they had something for Christmas, for New Year's Eve, Or they also have general themes, for example, free games, where they talk in the spam mail about free games that you can download. They have the postcard, the greeting cards, which was pretty effective for them. They even had a very short run with privacy concerns, where the spam mails had a content of that you should be aware that somebody could spy on your network traffic, therefore you should download Tor. They also had some on just greeting cards for the NFL season, for downloader. So they are constantly changing the social engineering campaign. They're constantly changing the binary. They have probably one of the best malware binaries out there that they have developed, constantly evolving. So I think this is a large group, and probably they make probably some money with it. So it's modern cybercrime. This is just a picture showing how effective or how much spam they are actually sending. We have several spam traps up and running, which collect between 5,000 and 10,000 spam mails per day. And this is for a period of about 55 days. Basically, it shows on the x-axis just the day, and then the y-axis the number of spam mails received on this particular day, just for the e-cards. So just spam mails that they talk about somebody sent you a greeting card, please click here to view it. And we see that they can send hundreds of emails, and typically between 2 and 5% of the spam mails we receive in this spam traps are just originating from Storm. And on several days we also had more than 10 or even 20% of the spam mails just being Storm related. They quite often also change their campaign. This is for a period of about 20 days in October this year, where they, starting at October, there was Labor Day, so they had a special campaign where they were just talking about Labor Day in the emails. And then they switched for one day to Tor. Then they had, to the start of the NFL season, they had spam mails talking about an NFL tracker, and then they started with the free games. So they are constantly changing, and therefore it's pretty hard to keep track of it. And also the AV companies and security companies have a pretty hard time to basically follow everything. The spam mails themselves look always the same, basically some kind of very easy story. Your son has sent you movie quality e-card from mycardmaker.com. Click on the link. This is another one, another one. So basically it's always the same, always some pretty standard text, and then just a link that's included. And for the people who do not know how to click on something, they even provide sometimes instructions of how to copy and paste. So owning made easy. If you click on something, then you'll see a website. Probably they also have somebody who's doing graphics, since the website looks pretty nice now. This was the NFL one for the start of the NFL season. And if you click on any of those links, you get a binary on, about which I'll talk later on. These are the free games where you could download something, and every click leads you to a binary. There was the Hello Kitty. Then they had the dancing skeleton for Halloween. This was actually now in December 24th, so for Merry Christmas. And this is then the current campaign. I don't know what's wrong, but basically the web page now looks very, very boring. So it's just some text, and then you just can click there, and then you can get the latest binaries. Actually, these domains started to show up, I think now 2 days ago. I think the New Year card 2008 is actually from today. So this is currently live traffic. And then if you open one of those, so if you click on the mail, you get to this website, which I showed some screenshots for. And then if you take a look at the source of the web page, you'll see just obfuscated JavaScript. So at the top, you'll see, it's a JavaScript. It has an XOR string, something, where they basically dynamically generate the code. So the whole text is as first XOR encoded. They just decrypt it during runtime, and then basically this content also changes every couple of minutes. So they re-encode the actual website every couple of minutes. Decoding is rather easy. Basically, you just take this JavaScript, feed it to a JavaScript interpreter, which could be, for example, JS, so njs-javascript.org, or Mozilla, which basically takes the SpiderMonkey engine, which is the JavaScript implementation of Firefox, and then you can basically just feed the JavaScript and it decrypts everything for you, and this works most of the time. With the newest version, so with the version they use since 4 days or so, it's a bit more complicated since the JavaScript is more heavily obfuscated, but nevertheless, since it's just JavaScript, it's pretty easy to get the real code. Once you have decoded or de-obfuscated everything, you will find various exploits. The standard browser exploit like set slice or VML, and then they also include exploits for common browser modules, for example, for the Yahoo Messenger, for the WinZip file view, and basically for all those browser plugins that you can install for IE, they have the right exploit. So not only focusing on exploiting the browser, but also exploiting actually add-ons. Actually, when you click on it, the website also, or the PHP script also checks whether the user agent indicates Firefox, Internet Explorer in 2 different versions, and only if the user agent matches, and if this is your first request, then you get the actual exploit, and then if you reload it again, then you don't get it. So it's just a one-time hit, where they basically also cache locally the IP address, which is pretty standard for the web-based attacks nowadays. In total, they have 3 different kinds of exploits. So one for Firefox and 2 different ones for IE, depending on which version of IE you're running. And then they basically fire those exploits and hope that one of them triggers and exploits a vulnerability. And then they install a binary. Or the other option is that the user just clicks on something, and then it basically asks the user whether he wants to download and install it. And then basically if the user just clicks OK, then he infects himself, which we probably cannot prevent. Okay, once the binary is at the local system, it basically starts up. It drops a rootkit. It stays in kernel mode. Then it also hooks several API calls. It injects itself into TCP IPsys to basically stay under the radar. So it has some pretty neat tricks. Most of them are outlined in the paper by Frank Boldewijn, reconstructor.org. In the paper pcom.c, Cracking the Nutshell, he shows how to unpack it and also shows some of the advanced techniques that Storm uses. And since I want to focus more on the network level aspects, I'll just talk about 2 things that are important for me now. The first one is that it uses W32TM, which is a tool shipped with Windows, to synchronize the local time via NTP. So each Storm-infected node has an accurate clock, which is probably the only benefit of being infected. And this is used later on to basically, since they do some computations based on the time, they need roughly an accurate clock at an infected machine. And the other important thing is that the binary also drops a contact file, which contains IP addresses of other infected systems, so that they have some kind of starting point for the peer-to-peer-based mechanism. So if you remember your of how you use peer-to-peer-based networks, you also need to know some peers in advance to basically connect to the network, and this is basically the contact file. And one premise of our research is that we analyze the bot as a black box. Basically, we do not reverse engineer the whole binary, since this takes too long, especially since they are changing this every couple of days. Then I would just sit within Ollie or within IDA to analyze the binary. Therefore, we try to treat it as good as possible as a black box, just run the binary and then just take a look at the outcome in order to basically stay at the front, so that we see new advancements in the binary itself. And only if necessary, basically analyze or reverse engineer the binary. The analysis setup is very easy. Basically, we just have a honeypot so just a machine dedicated to run some kind of malware. The honeypot just runs Windows 2000, so nothing fancy, no real protection on the system. We do not basically change the system, so from a system point of view, it looks like just a legitimate system. Then in front of the honey wall, we have a system to basically stop outgoing attacks, so that we also have some kind of control of outgoing malicious traffic. We use a tool called Truman Box, which was developed as part of another thesis at our lab, where the basic idea is that you have a firewall which has also some advantages. So, for example, if you have an outgoing connection, you can redirect the traffic to a local service. So, for example, imagine that the binary which is running on the honeypot wants to contact a mail server running somewhere in the internet, for example, Gmail, the AMX of Gmail. Then it initiates a TCP connection, and then here at the Truman Box, we basically redirect it to the local SMTP server running on this box. Then we also contact from here Google, fetch the banner, and then basically replay the banner to the honeypot. So from the honeypot's point of view, from the network level, it looks like it would actually connect to Google, but in reality, it just connects to this box where we then basically handle all the spam and everything what's sent there. We also have some firewall rules in place so that we stop outgoing DDoS attacks in order that we do not harm other systems running somewhere else in the network. And actually, we do not have only one of those honeypots running, but several of them to study different aspects of the binary. But yeah, in total, it's just a very, very easy setup, so nothing really advanced. Truman Box will be available for download probably in January or so. So we'll release it under GPL soon so that you can also play with it. Okay, now focusing on the network level behavior. Basically, once Storm starts up, it first drops the rootkit, does the API hooking, also injects into other drivers, but then it also spawns a user level process, and the user level process then basically takes care of the whole communication. So yeah, this user level process is basically taking care of finding the other peers, talking to the other peers, and then receiving the commands, and then also acting on those commands. For actual communication, as I said earlier, it's a peer-to-peer based protocol, and the attackers, they chose Overnet, which is a distributed hash table. On the next two slides, I'll talk more about DHTs and what they are all about. But for now, you can think of a DHT as some kind of distributed lookup directory where you store content within the actual network. So we have a peer-to-peer based network, and within the network, you store these the content in a distributed fashion. So I'll explain this in more detail on the next slide. In order to connect to the peer-to-peer network, it uses the initial list of peers found or dropped in the first stage. This INI file typically has a list of 250 or even 500 IP addresses. Some of those are even legitimate Overnet nodes. So we found several of them running Linux, which could not, or which can actually not be infected with Storm. Some of them are running in universities. So some of them are actually legitimate, and they change this INI file every couple of days or so. Therefore, it's also not possible to take down all of them. So taking down 250 IPs is almost impossible in today's internet. And at least, or if at least one of those IPs is up and running, it can be used as a stepping stone to then connect to the real or to the rest of the peer-to-peer network. Okay, so how does a distributed hash table work? As I said earlier, it's some kind of, or you can think of it as some kind of distributed dictionary where you can basically store content. And the DHT provides you with a mapping between a key, which is basically a 128-bit identifier, and a value, which is basically some kind of pointer where to get the actual content. So this is Overnet, or distributed hash tables, were originally developed for basically distributed content hosting, and probably you know some of them due to the file sharing and everything, where they get pretty popular. So DHT, mapping between key and value. The values itself, they are located with the help of keys. The idea is that if I am a node and if I want to search for some content, I initiate a search request. The search request is then a unique 128-bit identifier. I search for this identifier within this distributed table, which is organized in such a way that each node knows some part of the content and only the part that is near its local node, and then content which is further away, there it only knows how to route the request to the real destination. And every node within the network, since it's a peer-to-peer based network, stores some of the content. So each system is a client and also a server storing something. The values that are stored within the DHT are actually a tuple of just an IP and a port, where the node then knows, okay, if I want to get certain content, I need to contact this IP on this port, and then I get more information or even the actual content. In order to compute a distance between two nodes, they use the XOR metric. So each node also has a unique identifier, and in order to know how far away another node is from me, I just compute the XOR between my ID and the ID of the peer. So this would be my ID, this would be the ID of the peer. I XOR both of them, and then this is a large value, so this is far away from me. And within my local table, I just store some contacts, and only the contacts that are near me. And for the other peers, I just have some kind of routing lookup. The routing lookups itself is based on prefix matching. So imagine that A wants to talk to D, and then A at first takes a look at its local cache. So it takes a look at which nodes do I know. For each of them, it computes the distance between this, the node D, so the final destination, and the node in the local table. And then it sends the request, or it forwards the request to the contact which has the smallest XOR distance to the final destination. And if you do this iteratively, you'll finally also you'll find the destination, and from there you get the value, which then brings you to the real content that you're actually looking for. And this routing lookup and this routing searching is basically used by Storm in order to find the commands. So a normal, just a simple IRC-based botnet, they have a central server where basically every peer connects to the central server that receives the commands and then acts on them. Storm is different since it uses peer-to-peer. And within a peer-to-peer network, I cannot do some kind of pushing. So if I am the controller, and if I want to send a command to my bots, I cannot just push something because I do not know who is infected. So I don't know who is legitimate and who is an infected user within the network. Therefore, they have to reverse the command structure. Basically, the infected node just searches for something, and then in advance, the attacker has deposited or published some content at this specific hash. So because the attacker knows in advance what keys the infected node will search for, he can basically publish something at these specific keys, distributed in the whole Overnet space, and then Storm just searches for this, and then as a return value, it gets the commands. So you can think of this as some kind of rendezvous point or some kind of mailbox system where the attacker knows in advance which mailboxes the infected machine will look for, and then he just deposits the commands in those mailboxes, and then once an infected machine searches for something, it actually finds something in this mailbox. So some kind of rendezvous mechanism in order to get a communication channel within a peer-to-peer network. The whole communication just on the time axis looks like this. At first, the host 1, which is an infected machine. So this is a user who has just clicked on the malware and infected himself. He knows some peers based on the ini file. This could be then host 2. It just sends a publicize request just to contact the peer. Then the peer basically acknowledges, okay, you are online, and then the infected node wants to connect to the network, and connecting basically means that this peer basically tells the first one, okay, these are other infected machines, or these are other, these are other machines located within the peer-to-peer network. So it replies with typically between 5 and 10 other members, so other peers of the network. And then if the host does this a couple of times, so if he queries or if he issues the connect requests a couple of times, he learns more and more peers within the whole network. So he can build up his local lookup table, he knows its peers, and then he's basically part of the peer-to-peer network. And then here in the search step, basically he searches for some specific hash values, and as the return value to those searches, it receives more information on where to connect to, and from there it has a specific protocol of what it speaks, which I'll talk in the next slides. Okay, the Storm network itself is a bit more complicated, so they do not use just a simple structure, but they have basically two types of nodes. On the one hand, they have the nodes that are located behind a NAT gateway, so that have private IP addresses after RFC 1918. So those IP addresses behind a NAT gateway, they are used for spamming and for DDoS. These are basically the slaves that do all the dirty work, spamming DDoS and everything. And then they have the machines with the public IP addresses, who are then part of the actual control infrastructure. Basically, those are machines that also run a web server and a DNS server. Via the web server, they host the actual websites we've seen the screenshots from, and the DNS server, they use this also for doing lookups, which I'll talk later on about FAST-FLUX. So basically, they differentiate whether the infected node has a public or private IP, and then act differently. Okay, coming back to the hashes. So how do they actually find the commands that are issued by the attacker? Basically, every day they generate one of 32 hashes. So the hash computation algorithm is based on a random number between 0 and 31, and then it also takes the current date. They mix this together, have a way to basically generate a hash key, and then they basically search for it. These are just a few examples for the keys used on October 25th this year. As you see, I think there are some repetitions. Yeah, here we have this 7DC something, and here it's repeated again. So we have the hashes that are searched for, and the other column basically lists the date. And we get this by basically running the binary within our honeypot, just waiting a couple of minutes until we see the search requests going out, and then we revert back to a clean system, let it run again, let it search again, and then extract basically during runtime those keys. And if we plot this on basically on the x-axis, we have the time on a specific day, so on October 17th, and then in the y-axis, we have the key number. Basically, the first time we see a key, we assign it the number 1, and if we see this in subsequent iterations, we basically can track of how often we've seen a specific key. So this means we've seen, actually, and this should be actually a 1. We've seen at 4 minutes after midnight, we've seen one specific key, and then a couple of minutes later, when we reboot the machine, rerun the sample until it starts searching, we get another key, and then another one, and here we get also repetitions. So we see that basically there are some repetitions, there are some kind of patterns within this, and after 32 hashes per day, we do not get any more of those. If we plot this for a longer day, so this is a period of 5 days, we see that each day 32 hashes are generated. So we could find this out via reverse engineering. So we actually the algorithm is based on reverse engineering, but then we also verified this just based on our honeypot setup that there are actually only 32 hashes each day. Okay, the Stormworm communication actually works in such a way that once the Stormworm searches for those hashes, it receives as an answer to the search requests some more information on which IP and port it should contact, and then it just contacts the specific controller IP, and then in the first step there's a simple challenge and response, so that the host actually has to prove that he's actually a valid node, so that he's also infected, and then the host contacts mx.google.com in order to test whether it can also send out spam emails. So these are the test results. Then it also basically the controller just acknowledges this, so he just sends answers back. The host also searches on the local disk for email addresses. It searches the hard disk for other content. It also sends information about the local IP address, the operating system and everything to the controller. And then basically the controller either sends the infected node a template in order to spamming. So these are the emails that we've seen earlier, where the Storm node just gets a template, so it gets the whole mail body, it gets a set of recipient addresses, a set of sender addresses, and then just based on this template, it generates in each iteration a new spam mail and then sends it out. Or it can also receive orders to start a distributed denial of service attack in order to attack other systems. And there we see quite frequently attacks, so DDoS attacks against some antivirus or more the anti-spam companies. And then the bot basically starts spamming or starts DDoS. Okay, so the authentication step is rather easy. So the controller sends the challenge, and the Storm node sends back a response. If you just XOR this, you receive a certain value. If you observe a second challenge and then the second response for the Storm node, you see that this is, if you XOR both of them again, you see that you receive the same result. And also for the third one. So if you XOR the challenge with a response, you always get the same XOR key. So therefore, this is the key that is used to authenticate, so a very simple authentication scheme in order to prove that you are actually a legitimate node. The actual communication afterwards, they use zlib, so just a zip library to basically compress the communication. Nothing fancy, so you can just a couple of lines in Python to decrypt this. Storm sends the information about the local Windows version and the IP to the controller. It tests the spamming via mxgoogle.com. We had this already in the picture. And then you get this the spam template and then starts spamming. So the actual Storm overlay network that is built on top of Overnet is rather easy, so nothing really fancy there. Okay, so what can we now learn more about Storm? So basically we have this peer-to-peer network. So each bot communicates with a set of peers. And now we want to get basically an overview of how many peers are there, how many of them are infected with Storm. And this is what I'll talk in the remainder of this talk. Okay, in order to get an overview of how many total peers are there, we've implemented a crawler. The basic idea is that if I'm a member of the peer-to-peer network, I can talk to my peers and ask them, okay, who is your peer? So I could just contact you, and then I'll ask you whether, or I ask you to send me your contacts, you send them to me, and then if I do this recursively, I'll basically crawl the whole space since I get more and more contacts. This is the general principle of how you can learn more about peer-to-peer systems. Just crawl them in an iterative way. Moritz, he had already done some work in this area. He had presented a crawler for CATC, which is one of the bigger peer-to-peer networks currently out there. They had a paper this year at IMC. And we adopted this crawler to basically also crawl the whole Overnet network. And this crawling is actually rather fast. So on one machine, it takes between 20 and 40 seconds to basically get through the whole space. So just asking in an iterative way everyone who knows which peers. Okay, so with the scrolling, we get a rather good overview of who is currently online, who is a member of the peer-to-peer network. But since there are also legitimate users within the peer-to-peer network, we have to find a way to differentiate between who is legitimate and who is infected. And therefore, we use the so-called Sybil attack, where the idea is that the whole Overnet space is 128-bit large. And then if we join the network with many, many, many peers, and if we position the peers in such a way that we are basically near everyone, then we are in the routing table of everyone. And if somebody wants to communicate with somebody else, then the chances are very good that this request is routed through my computer, so that I can then see who is searching for what. So yeah, the basic idea is we have 2 to the power of 24 Sybils, so rather many Sybils. We can basically join the network with so many peers because we do not need to keep any state. We just encode within the first 22 bits basically the space within the whole peer-to-peer space where we want to be, and then all following bits are fixed. And then if you imagine the whole space to be just a large matrix, we basically position our peers in such a way that we are basically spread across the whole matrix, and in such a way that we are basically evenly spread and near basically everyone else, so that we are in the routing table of all other peers. So many nodes are then near us, and they also use us to basically relay their content. And basically this works rather well. When we do a full crawl, these are numbers based on the October results. We observe between 45 and 80,000 online peers. This does not take NAT into account, since for each IP or for each peer that's behind NAT, we just see one IP. If 2 peers share the same public IP, we cannot differentiate this. So this is basically just a rough estimate of how many peers are out there. In total, so within this 1 month, we saw 420,000 different Overnet IDs on 1.7 million different IP addresses. So these are basically just the unique users who were online during October, and due to things like DHCP, or if you have to redial in every 24 hours, the chances are good that you get a different IP address. So therefore, we see many more IPs. About 25% of those are behind NAT. So this is just a rough estimate, since for those 25%, we cannot give good numbers, since we cannot easily differentiate whether there's just one peer or hundreds of peers behind one NAT gateway. And so these numbers are just some kind of upper bound, because they are also legitimate peers within the whole network. On average, with the help of the Sybil attack, we see that between 5,000 and 6,000 bots publish Storm-related content. So these are part of the control infrastructure. They publish hashes, which then other peers can search for. Those are then also typically the DNS servers or the web servers where you can also download the content. And we see about 30,000 peers per day searching for the content. So this is then basically a lower bound, since probably we do not see all searches, but at least we see 30,000 peers being infected each day and searching for Storm-related things. Then something that was also hyped in the media was the encryption, which was added in October this year, where each protocol message is then encoded with an XOR key. So just you take a message, XOR it with this 40-byte key, and then you get the encoded message, and then you just send it out. So they did not change the core protocol, but they just XOR each message with a specific key, which was pretty easy to reverse engineer. I think it just took us a couple of days, couple of hours or so, just to get this 40-byte key. And up to now, we've seen in the wild only just this one key being used. So they could use this to split the network in different regions or different zones, but up to now, it was just this one key used in the wild. In a 1 week period in October, we've seen about, so on average, about 6,000 hosts online within the StormNet, so within the encrypted part of the peer-to-peer network. And in total, we've seen 33,000 different IDs on about 300,000 unique IP addresses. So, and those are all infected machines, since there is no legitimate client which speaks this encrypted version of the Overnet protocol. So this then shows, okay, there are several IPs being compromised, who are infected, who are running Storm, but it's not as bad. So we do not have millions of clients being infected within Storm. Okay, so we have now a way to basically get a good overview of who is online, who is infected, and now the next step would be, okay, how can we do mitigation? Can we also somehow stop this peer-to-peer based network? The first attack that's quite popular within the peer-to-peer security community is eclipsing content, where the idea is that since the client just searches for a specific key, we could just overwrite this, or this hash. If we just publish something on the same hash, we basically introduce a collision, and then since within the eclipsing, we would then be basically in the middle of the routing process, and then we could inject something where the we could basically inject something. Sorry, shit. Probably start again. So with the Sybil attack, we are able to position ourselves across the whole network in such a way that we are near the search request for everyone. So everyone is relaying his content over our computer. And therefore, we could also inject something which is not the real executable, but which points to something else. This is unfortunately not possible within Overnet, since the whole room is too sparse, so we cannot get hold of all the requests. So for the technical details, I'll refer to the paper. And polluting content, this is something that actually works, where basically the idea is, since the infected nodes, they search for a specific key, we can just publish something on this specific ID and then override. So we can introduce collisions, so that if another party searches for this content, it receives legitimate answers from Storm, and it also receives the bogus answers that we inject here. So we can introduce collisions, and this actually works. Or it seems to work at least. The basic algorithm used here is that we at first crawl the network. We announce then on all the keys that we know that are used by Storm, we announce our bogus things, and we also do a broader overwriting. So if they have at least 4 bits in common, we basically just send them a bogus request that basically points to ourselves. And then, for example, within 5 seconds, we can publish bogus content on about 400 peers. And in subsequent requests, those peers then return our content and not the real Storm content. And then if a new infected machine then searches for this content, then it also finds our fake hash values, and therefore we have then some kind of collision, and they do not get the real controller where they should then connect to. This seems to work. We just tried this for a couple of hours, and unfortunately, once we stop our overwriting, so once we stop the polluting, within about 30 minutes or so, the whole network recovers, since they are publishing quite aggressively. Therefore, it's pretty hard to do this in reality, but at least in theory it works. Problem with all the academics. So in theory it works, but in practice we still have some problems. Okay, some other aspects of Storm. One interesting thing is the auto DDoS. Basically, if you query the whole network too often, so if you download the executable too often from the web server, they'll start to DDoS you. So this is not that nice, but this is what they do. I found this actually out the hard way, so I was just at a conference VPNing back into my university. I just had a couple of scripts that were downloading the content, and suddenly everything stopped. So my network connectivity was gone. Then about 30 minutes later, I got an email from our admin who told me that they are currently under attack, so ICMP flooding against my IP address. So they were not that happy. And since then, basically, I have an agreement that I do not do this too often. So basically, we have, within 50 minutes, we had about 50 million packets from 1,500 sources targeting my IP. Yeah, not very nice. And basically, it is enough if you, I think, send 2 requests to 2 different IPs within 5 or 10 seconds and do this concurrently and repeatedly. Then it starts after a couple of lookups. Another interesting thing is that they are very active in the back end. So they have a very active back end where they repack everything. So every minute the download sites changes. So the JavaScript that you can download from the site changes every minute, where they repack everything with a different XOR key. And the actual Storm binary also changes. So these are just MD5 sums of subsequent downloads. This was before the DDoS, where you see some repetitions, but then every couple of downloads, basically the whole MD5 changes, where they also do the repacking. And they also change the version quite frequently. So I've seen sizes between 70 and 160 kilobyte. So they add features, they leave features out. So they have an actual good development team behind everything, I think. Another thing are FAST-FLUX domains. So the idea behind FAST-FLUX is that if you resolve an IP, if you resolve a DNS entry, then basically you normally just get as a return value an A record or at least a couple of A records, and those stay the same most of the time. So if you just do a dig, so just a DNS lookup, for example, for Heise.de, you get, I think, 2 A records back. And if you do this repeatedly after the TTL has expired, then you'll get the same set of A records. But with FAST-FLUX, the basic idea is that they use fast-changing DNS entries. So if you resolve one of those domains, then you'll get a... my network is not working, unfortunately. Basically, if you resolve one of those domains, you get an A record, and if you then do a subsequent resolve, you get another one, and then if you resolve again, you get another one. Probably I can show you this small demo. Now let's see, Storm. I just need to open this, sorry. Shit, I don't find it. Okay, I'll do the demo later on if we have time. So basically the idea is that they use a TTL of just 5 seconds, and due to caching and everything, you just see a TTL of 0. So if you resolve one of these domains, you get an IP address which points to an infected machine. If you then do a repeated lookup, you get another IP of an infected machine. And if you do this 1,000 times, you probably get about 600 or so different IPs that are then basically pointing to infected machines. And if you contact those, you can contact them on port 80, so they have a web server running. You can request, for example, sony.exe or file.php. Or the current one is also happy2008.exe. And if you just send this request as a return value, you get the latest version of Storm. And the blue ones, those are currently active. So we have Merry Christmas Dude. This was Mrs. Claus. And then the UF postcard and New Year's card 2008. These are the current themes for New Year's Eve. And then these are 2 older ones, so the PTOWL was used during Halloween, and this one also. And those are online now since a couple of months, and happily serving IPs of infected machines, and then also the latest Storm binaries. okay, what can we expect for the future? So what will 2008 or 2009 bring us? Obviously, I don't know why they do this now, but probably in the future they start using strong crypto. So they should encrypt everything using asymmetric keys, since we could then basically just see what they're doing but do not inject anything or so. They could use signing to verify everything, authenticate everything. So all those strong crypto things that they could implement, I'll think that they'll start using this next year or so. We could, as a defender, then still track the network, but if they change the keys quite frequently or so, we also on the downside. So I think this would make our life a bit harder. And then currently they use this distributed hash tables, so basically some kind of rendezvous point where the attacker basically publishes in advance the commands that the bots should execute, and then the bots search for those commands or search for hashes and then find the commands. So this rendezvous style communication is also not appropriate. I think something like NNTP, so news protocol, this would probably make our life also harder. There are also some other algorithms developed in the fault tolerance community, which could basically make tracking or also taking down mitigation way harder for us. So if they just study the literature and this kind of protocols, the attackers will find plenty of tools or ways to improve their current binary. And then also the techniques from the cypherpunks. So message routing via Tor is only one possibility, or hosting the CNC server as a hidden server would be another one. So the cypherpunks have also developed very cool techniques for basically resilient communication, so that I can publish something and nobody can take it down. But of course, this can also be abused by the attackers. So, and probably you will see something in the future. Okay, so much from me. More information available at my blog, honeyblog.org. And hopefully in the beginning of January, we'll also have a paper basically detailing everything I talked about, talking in detail about the communication, the searching and everything, where you can read everything. And yeah, and there's of course this cool new book on honeypots, which I could just recommend. Okay, questions for now? I think we have about 5-6 minutes, so should be fine.
A legal question, because if you have the possibility to analyze during 20 to 40 seconds which IPs are infected, would it be legally possible to counterattack this IP with a distributed denial of service attack? Also is DDoS illegal in Germany?
I don't know whether it's illegal, probably yes, but if you just DDoS, because those are victims, these IPs are not the actual controller, those are just the victims, so if you just DDoS them, you do not gain anything.
Hello. These DNS servers that are serving these DNS domains, that was a pretty short list. Isn't that a weak point as well? Can they be fixed or in some way?
Okay, these were, I think, only probably 20 or so, even less, and 5 of them are currently active. But so within FAST-FLUX, it's also possible that they host the actual DNS server within the network. So they do not have fixed DNS servers, but the DNS resolvers are basically also part of the network. And since each infected machine also runs the DNS server, they resolve this dynamically. Okay, you could talk to .com, to the TLDs, and then get it shut down, but this is rather hard.
But I mean, the NS records for these that are hosted with the TLD, main COM server, yeah. That can't really be FAST-FLUX, or can they update because they can't really update the .com zone in FAST-FLUX?
No, but they do not need to update the .com, but just the pointer to the name servers. So.
Yeah, but okay, so it's pointed to a static name server. Why isn't that fixed? Okay, so you haven't looked into that?
No.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to know, besides the time you need and that their binary and protocol is perhaps a little bit obfuscated, what exactly prevents you currently from shutting down the botnet? Because the authentication doesn't seem to be very well, and you seem to have reverse engineered a lot of parts of the protocol.
Yeah, so as I detailed very briefly, we can basically pollute the space so that a new infected machine will not find or will not receive the commands reliably. But we need to run, to have this running all the time. And I'm just working at a university, so I'm not a security company, I'm not police, so we just do this for research. But if somebody would want to do this in large scale, I'm more than happy to collaborate. So.
Is there a command where you can shut down the client or the nodes, or can you just say start attack on this node or start sending spam?
Basically, if you send them some kind of fake executables or something, you get in a very gray area. So there's something, or if you just shut down the binary, it's not possible, and there are legal issues with doing such things.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I got a question. What would happen if another very strong botnet would, like DDoS, the central servers of the Stormworm system?
Yeah,
If
there are no
they
real
use
central servers.
every collection to every core server of the Storm system, what would happen?
On the one hand, there are no real central servers because basically it's a peer-to-peer network, so you do not have any central things. There are the servers that the controllers, but those are pretty hard to track down. They change them quite frequently, so it's hard to get to those.
But you guess if it happens one time, what would happen to the whole net? Will the whole net would be instantly shut down and useless?
No, probably not, since if you just DDoS the controllers, they can just change it to another IP or so. And again, legal risks. So.
Do you see any chance that worm developers would tend to use Web 2.0 mashup services like AppJet or Google Mashup Editor to host their malicious payload
Pardon, please speak up?
Could you imagine, or have you ever encountered that worm developers would use Web 2.0 mashup services like AppJet or Google Mashup Editor for storing payload and or worm logic?
There were some reports by, I think, Panda Labs or so, where they talked about this kind of things, but I didn't see any yet. So,
thanks.
There is no way to track who has. There is no way to track who has registered that domains.
Pardon, please speak up, so it's too noisy.
They use some domains. You have shown the domains they use.
I can't understand you, sorry.
Hello.
Can we probably take this offline and later on? Since I think I need to finish, I think we have only 1 or 2 questions left, and then we probably can talk about this offline.
Is this out?